If you are registered to my live stream classes, I want to let you know that something exciting is going to be happening over the next few months. We are going to be beta testing an upgrade to that service that will make it entirely interactive. We're going to take some of the aspects of my teacher's class and we're going to apply it to my weekly classes. If you don't know what it is, I live stream 4 classes a week, sometimes from when I'm traveling. I'm currently in Australia. I've been live streaming some classes from here. And pretty soon, it's going to really take on a whole new aspect. I'm really excited about it. And anybody who is currently subscribed is going to get to beta test it with us. And also, if you subscribe before the upgrade, you will get to lock in your current price indefinitely. So just to let everybody know that this is happening, if it's something that you've been considering, this is a perfect time to jump on. It's the Jay Brown Yoga live stream classes. You can find it at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, it's that time again. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How's it going? Are you new? Welcome if you're new. Are you returning? What's up? How's everybody doing? I am coming to you from Melbourne, Australia. Oh, that was bad. I don't know if I should keep that. I might have to re-record that. That's like a bad accent. I wanted to just say Melbourne because you have to say it real fast. They don't say Melbourne, like it's spelled. It's like Melbourne. You have to say it really fast. So I don't know if all of my Australian friends just are wincing and being like, "Oh, please stop while you're ahead." Well, I'm having a pretty good trip. I'm happy to say I'm right here in the home stretch. I already did Sydney. I did the Gold Coast. And tomorrow, I start 1 of 2 days here in Melbourne, and then I will head back home the following day. This is the only day off that I have in the 11-day trip where I am not traveling or teaching, and I really did need it. And it does give me just this little bit of window to do this so I don't feel so up against it like I did last week. But I have to tell you, a thing happened. Long-time listeners might remember a time where I was dealing with some pretty serious back pain. And I had a relapse right after the first weekend in Sydney. And basically, it was a big group in Sydney. It was like 60 people. I thought it went really well. I felt really good throughout. And then I went to bed that Sunday night, and I basically woke up in the middle of the night and my back was just like screaming at me. And I know what happened. I think, one, I've had a really hard time adjusting to the time zones. It's taken me like a good week. Only last night did I really feel like I got a solid night in. And I was just super fatigued, I think. And I did a thing. I did a demonstration that I didn't need to do. It was like an old habit. It was an old pattern. It was a big room of people. I was having lots of fun. And I just, it's like this thing that I do where I get to try to be impressive with what I can do with my body. And, I don't need to do that anymore. And I think the universe decided to make that clear to me. So it was very humbling. What it really meant was the day after we had to travel to get to the Gold Coast, and I had to ask my host, Mark from Key Yoga, who's like one of the coolest guys ever. If you get to Sydney, you should go hang out with Mark from Key Yoga if you get a chance. He's like, great guy. I had to ask him if he would carry my bags for me, which was so uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable for me to have someone carry my bags for me. But I knew that if I didn't do that, I was really going to be screwed because they were too heavy and it was going to hurt my back more. So he did. He carried my bags for me. It was fine. And then, I taught 2 days in the chair at the Gold Coast, and it was fine. It went great. And my back was feeling better by the time I was done with that workshop. And now I'm here in Melbourne, and I'm feeling way much better now. and I'm ready to do this last weekend. Everything's okay, but it's an interesting thing how I feel that if you put yourself out there into the world and you say you're going to stand by certain things and you want to really try to embody the things that you say you're going to stand for, if you slide out of it, if you compromise it, the universe speaks. It most certainly speaks. And I'm hopefully going to learn the lesson. I think this is going to be like the last time. I mean, there's very few occurrences where I demonstrate as a teaching tool. And I'm starting to think that it might even be even less that I would be using that. So I don't know. In any case, I'm very happy to be feeling better. Thanks to everybody in Sydney and the Gold Coast who came out to those workshops, and to everybody who I'm going to be hanging out with over the next few days. It's been really quite a wonderful time, and the inquiry has been deep and rich. Many, many podcast listeners, and so much good shared humanity. I am grateful. Thank you. And this is a very good way to introduce today's talk with Bernie McDonald. Bernie McDonald, the burn dog, is walking across America, essentially. At this point, he's doing 100 miles in all 50 states. He sent me an email that was intriguing, and he's a listener of the show, and he wanted to stop by my studio in Allentown to hang out and to have a practice. And that is what you are going to get to hear today, the conversation that we had. Something about what Bernie is doing speaks to a voice in me that wants to feel the passage of time in a way that isn't so manipulated, that wants to feel the earth underneath my feet and, and my hands in the soil. I know I feel cheesy saying that out loud, but I think part of the reason why I wanted to move away from Brooklyn was so that I could give myself opportunities to feel the passage of life and time in a slower, simpler way, in the same way that I'm practicing my breathing and moving exercises in a slower, simple way. And he's committed himself to something that seems kind of crazy on one hand, but on the other, I kind of get it. And I really just appreciated the fact that he came and hung out and shared some of it with me. I'm excited to share it with you today. Before we do, let me mention something about deep and rich inquiry. Maybe you remember some months back, I had a guy named Seth Powell on. He is the founder of Yogic Studies, and he has several online courses that are quite fantastic. I took his course on the history and philosophies of yoga, and I learned a lot. Seth is a very talented teacher. He makes things accessible that are often very hard to grasp, and understanding the history and the texts and having a broad view of where these things come from and where we stand in relationship to that is truly a profound benefit to anybody who wants to have a deep yoga practice, especially if you're a teacher. So as a listener of the show, you can get 15% off if you use a promo code JBrown15, all capital letters. That's promo code JBrown15, all capital letters, and you can get 15% off any of his online courses. Go to yogicstudies.com. All right, I think that's going to just be it. I am going to touch base with you on the other side. We do have some very exciting things coming, and I thought I might mention them, but we'll do that on the other side. For now, I think we will just get to it. Let's go to Allentown, Pennsylvania on a Tuesday morning and sit and have a conversation with Bernie McDonald. All right, man. I just hit the record button. We are officially recording, Bernie.
Oh,
yes.
This is exciting.
It is very exciting, and it's exciting on a couple of different levels for me. One, we were just talking about how like a lot of my podcasts these days, most of them are phone calls. And we're going to try to do something about that. I like it to be in person more because there's a big difference that I get to sit here and look right at you. But this studio that you're in with me here in Allentown, Pennsylvania, I have had it for 10 months, and the majority of the podcasts that have been recorded and gone out in the last 10 months have happened in this studio. But you are the first time anyone's actually been here.
Oh, wow.
You're like christening this space for the actual in-person conversation.
Well, I hope I can start a trend because this is the way to experience it. No, it's really good to see you in person rather than just, listen to your voice or, take guesses about how you really are. And but I guess you are actually energy-wise like what I guessed too, but yeah, you seem very much
so far in the last 10 minutes that you've been here.
Yeah, but it seems
I feel like the guy that you thought I was going to be.
Totally, yeah. I think because you're just so genuine and pretty effusive with who you are. You're not trying to stylize things. It seems like, and yeah, just honest, I guess. So
I'm trying.
Yeah, you're doing a good job.
Thanks. Well, honestly, you mentioned that you were passing through town, and you said that you were going to stop and take a class with me, which I thought was cool.
Right.
And then when I looked and saw what you were doing, walking across the country, I guess, right? You're still embarked on that, right?
Yes, just kind of, now I take public transportation, but mostly walking.
Okay, so you're doing this kind of crazy walkabout, like that term walkabout, right?
Yep.
That Australian term. I've done little walkabouts for I did one for 3 months in my life.
Okay, that's pretty solid.
But that was in my early 20s before I was tied down with a family and stuff. It seems like now I couldn't do that in the same way. But you're on a major, how long have you been at it at this point?
It started kind of fall 2013. Where I was I'm walking across the country, no one's stopping this. But I injured myself and had to form a new plan, which was walk 100 miles in every state I passed through, which I decided would be every state just over the course of my life. I didn't know if it'd be in one go or right now it's I do 2 or 3 states at a time, then go rest at my parents' house in Columbia, Missouri. Is what it is now. And it was walk across the country to have also a purpose in mind. I was inspired by a guy from a This American Life episode, Andrew Forstoffel. He was 23 at the time. It was episode 494 called Hit the Road. It's about just road stories. And he wanted to just explore. He was 23 at the time. He had one job after college and quit it, or he got fired, just fizzled out. So he was just what am I? What is America? I'm going to walk across it. And he was also had this question he was asking everybody, which was, what advice would you look back and give your 23-year-old self? And he had sound equipment, recorded it. It was, Ira Glass on This American Life even said, usually these sort of stories don't play for radio well, but this one totally does. And this podcast just got in my head, and I was just wow, this seems like something that works for me. A friend actually told me about it. My friend Gretchen was we had been out of town when This American Life came on Saturday, and she was catching up on what she missed when we were out of town. And she's like, Bernie, you got to listen to this week's episode because it's kind of reminds me of you. And I took a day to think about, walking across the country after I heard the episode, and I'm in. I'm doing it.
Well, there's been one other person on this show, Seth Powell, who told me a similar story where he had read something. It was an author, an environmentalist guy who started walking across America. I believe a black man, and he was very inspired by him, and so he walked. I don't think it was across the country, but basically from where he lived to where he was going to go to school, which was some crazy long distance. Took him months to get there.
Uh-huh.
But you're in your 20s, you say, when this happens?
Well, Andrew Forstoffel. My inspiration
Okay.
was 23. I think, when this is 2013, I'm 41 now. Let's do the backward math.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if it's the yoga or just general mindset, but I just blow people's minds. They're like, oh, you're like a 28-year-old grad student. I'm like, no, I'm a 41-year-old person who's been married and divorced and lived in England and now the U.S. and been traveling a lot. So, I mean, I think I celebrated my 36th birthday during the first walkabout that I did.
See, that's what I was trying to get to. Like, you couldn't have been too tied down.
I'd decided to get a divorce, had some time since the divorce to, really feel like I was back on solid ground, and really got into, I was already into yoga, but I got into teaching yoga, and so that was, I was like, I'm going to walk across the country, yoga studio to yoga studio, and learn more about yoga. I just learned to teach, been certified, and been practicing yoga since I was probably 28 off Brian Kess DVDs at home, back before there were yoga studios around. I was living in England with my wife at the time. She had a cushy job overseas working for the U.S. government, so I just tagged along, and I really found myself when I was in England. But the yoga scene didn't exist, so I just did the DVDs, but had a super solid, dedicated, 3 times a week, never missed a day home practice.
What was your other gig, like in your 20s and 30s before you were teaching yoga? What were you doing?
I was just, I just followed the girlfriend and then wife. Like we met in Missouri, where I'm from. She went to school there, so did I, but I was being born there, and in the Midwest, you're kind of a little reticent, kind of unsure of yourself. I just was kind of understimulated. Like, I needed to get out and see more things.
What did you study in school?
I studied architecture at first. Something I'm still very much into. If you look at my blog and see photos I take,
talking about the shape of the buildings and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still into it, but I think it was the fact that I got. This is ironic. This is 1996 when I graduated high school. I was scared about the cost of college education back then, and now it's just mushroomed up so high. But I was so out of state tuitions and got accepted to schools that were going to charge me so much more money than the University of Missouri is a solid school in Columbia, Missouri. So I went there, but I just needed more life experience. I started getting disinterested.
Smart. My wife's 44. We're still trying to pay off her student loans.
Yeah, and I was scared. My parents, which Pat and Pete are real solid people. My mom was just like, your sister at her liberal arts college, she's gonna owe money forever on that degree, and that wasn't actually true because my sister got a lot of scholarships, but still she owed some for some time. Yeah. So I didn't know myself that well. Yeah. Didn't know what to major in, so I just.
And they weren't pressuring you. A lot of people get pressured. You got to go to college. You got to go to college.
Yeah, I did feel that pressure. It's like living in England for 6 years as I did. Students often take a gap year, and just they're 18, 19, just go traveling. Mm-hmm. But since that's not in the U.S. culture, and I went to good public schools, and everyone's going to college. I had graduated with...
Yeah, we don't take Fridays off like in Italy or whatever.
Yeah, just explore your interests and explore. That's you have to hide that on resumes. You can't talk openly about just going off to find yourself and explore different cultures. So I did feel that pressure, and I'm like, I'm going to school, and my GPA I went from a 4.0 to a 3.5 to a 3 to a 2 to... I'm like, I just wasn't into school, so I stopped going. Met the wife. I worked office jobs, restaurants, worked a lot of restaurants through college, stayed with that. Decided, though, unless I was going to own a restaurant, I probably can't work in them anymore. I was getting burned out. Mm-hmm. My girlfriend at the time got a job. She started getting she worked for the U.S. Air Force. And anywhere there's an Air Force base, she could potentially get a job. So that's how we got to Anchorage, Alaska. And spent 2 years there. And I worked at JCPenney Furniture in the customer service department. Okay. So...
And did you get oil subsidies or whatever? Don't you get money when? Don't they have socialism in Alaska?
Everyone gets the permanent fund dividend, which I think the first year we qualified for it was at least $1,300 a person.
See, Andrew Yang wants to give us all $1,000 a month.
It felt good. I mean, some people just went out and bought big screen TVs and down payments on cars, but
I guess that's the fear that people won't want to work. But I don't imagine that would be true. I was saying it to my wife. I was like, imagine for a second if we just, given what our current situation is right now, and we're on a line there, if we were to just get an additional $2,000 a month, because each person gets $1,000, what that would do for us. And we was like, wow, what an impact that would actually have. And I wouldn't stop working.
No. You just put it to something, whether it's an aspiration you have, a little side gig, college fund for your
help
kids.
Pay down some of the fucking debt that we're all saddled with.
Yeah, make an extra payment on whatever you owe, your house, your car.
Everything. Everybody's underwater.
Yeah, just gave you peace of mind. And Alaska is just ridiculously expensive, though, because of it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
But I found it very inspiring to be out in nature, and you can go see a glacier and you could walk. This is where my walking thing started, because there were trails through town. I'd walk to work. Since you struggle to see daylight in the wintertime, I would walk to work in the wintertime just to see some daylight.
Well, I really appreciate that, because I have traveled more in the last 2 years than I think I did in my entire life prior to that. I didn't travel a lot earlier in my life, but my job has been a lot about traveling more. And, I feel one of the things I talked about with Seth when he talked about walking across the country, that it was a bit of a protest against the way we relate to our environment. And, I take all these plane trips and stuff all the time, and I'm conscious of that. But way that the calculation or justification I've made is that, well, this is an opportunity for me to see other places and other parts of the world, and take in other cultures and learn from that.
Yeah.
And in that experience, whenever I've gone to a place, I almost never take taxis or subways. I just walk. And if I can't get to it walking, then I don't care if I go see the tourist site. I almost don't want to. I want to just sort of feel a place. If I go outside when I was in Brooklyn and close my eyes and just feel what that feels like, and then I walk outside here at Allentown, I close my eyes, and they don't feel the same.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of interested. So I can appreciate this idea of walking, which is almost sort of a lost...
It's a lost art.
It's a lost pursuit. When do we just walk to get where we're going?
And when do you value the experience? I mean, your description there is totally why I do it, and what got me into it and what keeps me doing it, because I need to feel the place, to see it on and like you said, the tourist sites. I mean, if I happen to pass one easily, great. If I don't, it's fine. I mean, I just want to see how the regular people live. I don't want to be with tourists. I want to be with the landscape, I mean, that's the only way that I can feel like I really know a place.
All right, so you hear this podcast episode and decide that you're going to just start walking across the country. Do you have some kind of plan? Do you come up with some kind of ground rules? Do you have some little money that somebody's going to support you if you get into a bad spot? How out on the ledge are you, my friend? I mean, you said you got parents that will help you, so they must be supporting you on some level, that they'll let you crash there even.
Right. Well, I mean,
what do they think? You're in your 40s, you're walking around the country.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was scared to tell them at first, because, I was scared to tell a lot of people. It turned out that when I was living in Portland, Maine at the time, I'd kind of let a lot of people know, unbeknownst to me, how many people that had this dream of a road trip across the country, but I wasn't sure when and what. I don't know if I'd ride a bike or take a bus or, get a little Volkswagen minibus kind of thing. But people knew, so it wasn't as much a surprise when I told people locally. Calling the parents, my mom was not that shocked. She really, I was like, really? She's like, oh, well, it was almost kind of good for you. And I was like, how do you see this coming? It scared me, because I'm it was more of, I saw the window of opportunity. Now's the time, if ever.
Because you're not you don't have something holding you down.
Right. I used to have a dog, left it with my ex-wife. I don't have any children. I had a beautiful job working at this bakery and coffee shop. I had almost gotten fired for some strange reason a few weeks before. You know, I'm like, okay, maybe I need to switch jobs. The place I lived was month-to-month rent. The person I lived with, my live-in landlord's like, remember, that you said you were probably going to take a road trip, and so this summer, if you could move out. I'm like, okay, yeah, you are right. But I was just, all these things were coming together where I'm like, the window is now. And then the podcast came on a weekend when I was away at a 4-day intensive yoga training in New York City.
Okay, what training were you doing?
So I don't know if you're around the New York City scene. A woman named Anya Porter used to live around New York City.
Okay, the name sounds vaguely familiar. I'm not sure.
She's moved away since then, but she did some breakdancing and came up with this break-D yoga, which is breakdancing mixed with yoga.
You're a break dancer too, is that right?
Yeah, when I'm back in Missouri, I was like, I'm going to do something to keep myself stimulated and challenging. So I was like, I'll probably take a dance class. And when there was a breakdancing class at the studio I didn't know about, I jumped on it. And so that's a lot of the break to yoga stuff.
Awesome. I'm going to admit something that I've never admitted before, which is when I was growing up in the 80s in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, there was a place called Skating Plus, roller skating rink. And on Friday nights, it would stop being roller skating and would become a break circle. And I used to go because I could do the worm. I could do a full-on
I've never
acrobatic worm because I was like young and nimble. That was like my big move. Wow. But I would love to take my daughter to some hip, but now they call hip hop classes. They don't call it break dancing.
Yes,
I guess break dancing falls under hip hop.
Yeah, hip hop's more of your
evolved.
Yeah, hip hop you're standing upright more. Breakdancing, you start upright, you drop down to floor, get horizontal, do some arm
head spins and
windmills.
If you want, were you crazy like that? What were you doing?
No, I never got. I mean, I still do it. I've taken a little break, but essentially, I'm going in there. I'm the age of the parents that are watching their teenagers.
That's right. We're the old guys now.
Yeah, or my friend Kyle's like 25, so he's mid-range for it, and he doesn't have as much fear as I do of, like breaking something.
See, but that's what happens. I used to skateboard too.
Yeah.
And when I was like younger, I just didn't care. It was like skate or die, and you could be good at it.
Yeah.
But once I kind of got hurt, or I started you start worrying about getting hurt. You can't be good at certain activities that are like, you have to be totally balls out,
Right, and that's where, everyone... Breakdancing, I've loved how you can have your real own authentic style, and had a really good instructor. So it's like, you've got your yoga stuff, so that gets me a lot of body control and awareness already. So it helps me stay healthy and know when to say when. And if you're on your arms a lot, it makes me feel better because I'd rather break a wrist than an ankle with what I'm doing. So I figure, like, I can still walk if one arm stops working. So as long as I can not hit my head, a lot of people would keep practicing and practicing after we had our 1-hour class. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm just going to do some yoga stuff and wind down and save it for another day.
All right. So you gravitated to training that incorporated yoga and breakdancing.
And that was at my friend Gretchen's encouragement. She'd done a workshop with Anya and really respected what she did. And she's, Anya's into meditation and Buddhism, and she's super well-rounded. But then she also brings a breakdancer. Raphael Xavier comes in for half a day with us and talks to a DJ friend of hers. He talks about musicality and the history of hip-hop and when breakdancing started. It was the most well-rounded 4-day training, and then we had a little trial 10 minutes each teaching thing, which I was, the freshest meat yoga teacher in there. I'd been teaching certified for like a couple months. Mm-hmm. But it scared me to death. But when I pulled that off, it was such a confidence booster that I could hang with that. And like, you show up at Kula Yoga and you're, doing half of our training was there, and like that's just intimidating. But
so like the New York scene,
yeah. But I was almost so like new to it that it wasn't as intimidating.
It's really not. See, that's the thing. I cut my teeth in New York, started in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. We moved to Brooklyn when we all made the Mecca because we couldn't afford to live in the city. And now everybody's left Brooklyn too, mostly. But now having traveled all over the place, it's the same. It's
the
same all over.
And I did a vinyasa yoga training up in Portland, Maine, with this wonderful woman named Jackie Bonwell, and she was affiliated with Boston from the area. And so, in part of her training, she encouraged you to go to 5 other yoga studios, different styles of yoga. Just get out there and see other places. Don't just go to your place. And that really started, spark kind of this idea of seeing yoga in other studios and towns. Because I went down to Boston, went to South Boston Yoga, where David Vendetti just teaches these amazingly creative classes, and the people are really welcoming. And I was like, oh, I can just do yoga anywhere. It's like, it's my thing. I feel confident enough, and it's welcoming. And man, it was just brilliant. I'd learned so much just from going to a few different cities and other studios. And I was like, just filed that away. I'm like, this is a huge learning opportunity. So when I heard the podcast about walking across the country, I was like, oh, my thing could be yoga, learning yoga and seeing in different places, And I was like, man, that'll motivate me. And I've never been to California, so I took a day to think about it. I'm like, I'm going to walk across the country. That's my road trip.
Wow. So where were you starting and where were you heading?
Portland, Maine. I'm just, I was going to head south first because I didn't leave until late August. So I was worried about winter.
Yeah.
And so I mostly headed down the coast through New York City. Like I went east to west across Massachusetts from Boston to the Kripalu Institute. I went through Omega, the institute down there, kind of followed the Hudson River for a ways. It really freaked me out when I walked and saw the White House in Washington, D.C., and I was like, I have walked here. And I just,
So, all right, so you just walking, and then do you have a tent that you're sleeping in? What does it look like?
I have a cute little travel tent that, you can set up with a stick or a trekking pole. But you very rarely get to camp because, everywhere it's suburbia, it's a city, it's some sort of industrial wasteland. To find an actual campground that's not a squatting spot
where someone's not going to come driving up on you with flashlights.
Right, or deer hunters or something, especially in the Northeast, it's really hard. You'd have to, walk out of your way to find a campsite, at a state park. And some state parks close to the ocean especially cost $35, $40 for a campsite.
Yeah.
So it'll cost you a lot of money. So usually it's through couch surfing, which is an app essentially. It's a pay it forward thing. You host somebody when they're traveling, then someone else in the community will host you when you travel. You sleep on a couch, extra bedroom in the basement, that kind of thing.
Wow. So there's an app.
Yes.
People will let you crash on their couch.
Yes. It's been a little. Now you've got the Airbnb phenomenon. So some people that do the couch surfing hosting, they now do Airbnb because they get paid for having someone at your house. But it's just an informal Airbnb kind of thing.
Wow. So that's what you're doing, crashing on random people's couches?
Yeah.
Or iPhone app?
I've slept in yoga studios. I've been passed on, to a friend of a friend kind of thing. Or when you meet somebody in a town, they'd be like, oh, my friend or my sibling lives, here. So when you get, 5 cities away, there's a place for you. Sometimes on couch surfing, people haven't updated their profile. So I emailed this one girl, and she's like, oh my God, I moved, but I'm going to email my parents and tell them that, let stay there. So I stayed with her parents. And when I usually stay with older people, it's the best. Like, they get life. They get, how to...
They're like, what are you doing? You're walking across the country?
And they're encouraging. They're like, good for you. And they're like, and they just want to feed you and let you sleep. Younger people want to ask you a bunch of challenging questions, like
why? What do you think? They're threatened. See,
they want to know how you have money. Do you have a girlfriend?
So that was going to be my next question.
How
do you have money? How are you getting food to eat?
Right, and especially in bigger cities where there's more money pressure and time pressure, they're like, well, what do you do for work? People project their worries through me, or they're like, well, what's the worst thing that's ever happened, or isn't it dangerous on couch?
They don't ask what's the best thing. They ask what's the worst thing.
They ask this stressful stuff, and I mean, it's what I found. It was really hard for me because I'm already putting myself under mild stress by traveling, walking 15 to 20 miles a day, being in a strange place, having to look at some phone app off and on and check my email to see if the yoga studio I emailed got back to me. And half the time, people don't check their email. I mean, I don't hear back probably at least half the time when I email yoga studios, which was, I was like, well, I'm going to challenge this community aspect of the yoga world. And I was like, I wonder if it's really as community oriented as a lot of studios sell themselves as. And some places just aren't, they're a little overwhelmed, or they just aren't interested.
Well, I remember years ago, Matthew Remski wrote this piece about how every yoga center should also be a soup kitchen. And
Cool.
At the time, I had a center, and I scoffed, and I was like, that's not realistic, like we got rent to pay, and I was like taking this very sort of pragmatic stance. But, as time's gone on, I mean, I just had a conversation with someone about institutional oppression and how that expresses in the yoga world. And what you're pointing to is kind of it. We talk a lot about community and creating community and kulas, but when someone needs a place to crash, that's not the email that they answer as quickly as
No, and I mean, I feel I can feel the judgment, because I'll put in like an email to people.
What do you say? I'm walking across the country. Can I crash at your yoga center?
Well, yeah. I mean, I tell them, like, this is me. This is what I do. Back in 2013, there was a brief Yoga Journal article about me. Mm-hmm. Or I appeared on a local news thing in Maine, so I'd send links to that kind of stuff. Now I point them to my website. Like, this is me. This is what I've done. This is where I've been. They could, it's kind of like a reference thing. I know people are going to Google me anyway, but, and I'm like, so I want to come to your town, check out a yoga class, and looking for advice on where the good food is in town. Is it best places to walk to? And then also I'll throw in there, and if anyone in your community has a place for me to crash for a night or two, I'm an easy guest. I'm a good presence. And, when I do hear messages back, people will usually just address those first two things, like about food and, where's nice in town. They might completely skip over place to stay, which, in the hierarchy of needs is you need some shelter. And, I get it. Times are, not the easiest here in America, but also we're not some towns especially aren't very open to, other people and experiences. I think a lot of people here in America haven't had the chance to travel like people did when I was in England. So people aren't as open to travelers there. The worst thing that happened to me was in a very posh suburb north of New York City, where when I used, on the first trip, I would just show up at a yoga studio and someone was taking me in half the time. It was amazing. I would just show up and they'd be like, "Oh, what are you doing?" You're walking across the country, yoga. They're like, "Oh, do you need a place to stay?" That hasn't happened as much lately. I don't really know why, but one studio though, I did the usual thing. Just showed up for a class. It was the middle of the day. Met some people. Someone after class talked to me, so I was like, "Okay, I'm going to drop it in there." Didn't have any fear because I hadn't had any pushback really. It's like, yeah, looking for a place to stay. They got real quiet. They paused and they said, "Well, people here have daughters. I don't think so."
See that when you said to me the app about sleeping on people's couches, the first thing that popped into my head was like, oh, are people going to feel safe having some scruffy guy come sleep on their couch because he clicked a thing on a phone app? Would someone really do that? And then I thought, but then you say, oh, but when people do, it actually is really great.
It's amazing. Yeah. No, and it or I've had people, one of the other like invasive, hard questions people ask me. One was someone's like, don't you feel like you're using people? And early on in the trip, that really hurt to hear because that totally isn't the motivation. I'm not trying to use people to travel. And so I had to think about, okay, what is really happening here? And really, I'm really putting myself out there to make these journeys just on foot or, taking a bus. Like I got in past midnight last night because the Greyhound bus was late. And I'm really open and humble, just looking to learn and see. But also when I stay with people, I have things to offer. I have things to contribute. Just giving that person an opportunity to help me and share in my experience is a brilliant thing for them and me. I can help cook. I can talk to your kids about life. I've had people that look forward to introducing their children to me. And, one of the most touching things someone told me is, a stranger one time at the yoga studio was like, I'm going to go home and tell my kids about you because, they were feeling a little disgruntled about the world, but they're like you make it seem like it's still possible to really do what your dreams can still be chased after. Like there's still hope. Or someone told me that, they really, wish their son could grow up and do something and be like me. And I was just like...
could grow up just not having a job walking around the country,
well, that's the thing. It's like, are you gonna judge the value of the experience, or are you going to look in the short term and be like, well, what kind of money are you making doing that?
Yeah, see, I'm teasing because one of the reasons I moved here in this area in Lehigh Valley was that I wanted to see if it would be possible to feel more connected to my community. And I recently just got elected as the new communications director of my neighborhood association, just trying to see if I could know the people who live right next to me. And it's such a bizarre thing. And when you talk about someone saying to you, are you using people? It makes me think that for real community, there has to be a receiving. Like I heard someone talk about like making cookies for your neighbor and then putting it in a thing that they would have to return to you. So like, you know what I mean? To like build in, like instead of making it a disposable thing that they could just throw out after they eat the cookies, that you give them a reason to have to come back over.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of that. That you're challenging something.
I am,
built in ideas that we have about how we're supposed to live out our lives.
Yeah, I challenged, that's why...
In yourself,
yeah.
I imagine, as well as anybody else.
Exactly. There's a huge internal dialogue that happens, then it goes out to other people, and it's a lot. It's a lot for America to handle, it seems like, because it's, I'm a challenging person to a lot of people. It's hard to pin me down.
And what's sticking out in my brain right now is that this starts in 2013 into 2019.
Yeah. So
you're still doing it. I got to imagine at some point you're like, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I doing this?
Yes and no. It's more of the motivation of how I even, got to this place to start with. Now, to take you back to back when I lived in England and was married, I had a really, really formative experience with depression. A generally optimistic person, kind of as you see me now, but I had this depression hit in 2009, just being overwhelmed with relationship stuff. I was going back got my degree over there. But, my father has Parkinson's, I'm overseas and can't visit. So all these worries crept up and all of a sudden got depressed. So through having that depression, I was faced with getting to know myself to get back to a good place. So I was like, okay, what is Bernie about? And had to take a hard look about what motivates me and what am I passionate about. Had to go do those things in a big way to get happy again. So I knew myself on this level that, I was so grateful in time once I was not worried about being depressed anymore. I had this appreciation and this relationship with myself to where I knew what motivated me. And second, after that, when I came back, I had that idea when my wife at the time's job ended in England, had to come back to the U.S. That's where the dream of the road trip started. I was like, I'm grumpy about being back in the U.S. I'm like, how am I going to feed myself as well? How am I going to have as good of an experience? How am I going to walk around in the U.S.? I was like, well, my new, post-depression self was like, okay, let's be mature about this. Let's think it through. I did lots of counseling, did more yoga than ever, was more active, played a lot of everything I like to do, played a bunch of basketball, was around a bunch of people, got to know that I was more social than I thought. I realized I'm a people person. I didn't realize how big of one I was. So I made this deal with myself that I'd take the road trip, but I didn't know what form it was going to take. Took some time, waited a few years, figured out what that form was. So this relationship with myself got so deep post-depression, and still happens, where when I make a promise to myself, when I come up with an idea that's, what Bernie really truly is and wants, I keep those promises. Whether it's a girlfriend or significant other, my parents, whether they're scared by it or whether they're, people are scared for me, once, I get these ideas where, I had a shin splint that stopped my first walk across the country after 800 miles. But I was okay with, I had committed to, giving what I thought was a year of my time back then, year and a half maybe, to walking across the country. But I knew I didn't know how it was going to end. Mm-hmm. And so I was okay. I was traumatized by it. I got real sad about it. But what helped lift me up was like, I'm not done. I can still do this if I rest. And then the 100 miles in every state thing was like, I can take the bus and the train and walk where it's better and walk not too much and rest when I need to. Mm-hmm. And my girlfriend at the time was, frightened by that idea. I was like, that's going to take you forever. But I wasn't scared by that. I was like,
you didn't seem to me to have a particular time frame in which you were trying to do this.
Once you realize you've got that window of opportunity to do something this adventurous, just seize on it.
But you never thought for a moment, I'll do this for like a year and then I'll get a job? Or
I really seriously, I knew that I can't predict how this is going to go. I'm just going to have to live it, week by week, month by month, do what feels right. I trust the people that helped inspire me to do this. I trust my family to take care of me, and I trust the people.
You did have that, like if worse came to worse.
Yeah, I knew. Like part of what got me walking was I had friends in Virginia. I was like, I know if I get down to Virginia, they'll take care of me, and people did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the community in Richmond, Virginia, especially where I crashed in, I owe so much to them. But if you trust in the people, like as the more you travel around, you realize that there's great people everywhere. So, this belief and, the possibilities in community and the possibilities of just going to yoga classes to make you feel safe and okay. That's the biggest reason I do yoga, is because it makes me feel safe.
That's very interesting to me because you have I did see your map.
Yeah, it's extensive.
Some of the places you've been walking to. And I imagine, I have driven across the country once in my life. Didn't see as much of it as you have, but I remember because I grew up in Los Angeles and then moved to New York, I've been a coastal person. Yeah. That when I have seen the middle of the country, I was kind of freaked out. Like there were a couple places I remember being in some place in Indiana, some small place in Indiana. I was just walking, I just wanted to go walk somewhere to get something, and people drove by and made comments about the freak or whatever, and I got freaked out. I'm like, this is not a safe place for me. America. Yes. I'm an American.
And you're just walking around.
Thought of, Easy Rider or something. That comes to mind. So I'm curious about what you've seen, what you've come up against. You said something hopeful just now, but I imagine it isn't always hopeful.
Well, at the end of every day, it is when I, end up at someone's house and, eat some nice food.
Someone's showing you a bit of kindness.
Right. There's always kindness, but, people are at their worst when they're in their cars. So you will have, someone shout out a window at you just to startle you, or thankfully no one's tried to cut too close to the side of the road to run me off the road, but I'm ready for that always. I know that people might be looking at their phone the whole time, but you totally do deal with that bleakness, or just strip mall after strip mall in some town.
And time of just endless stretches of concrete. And
yes, the concrete
I saw
prairie.
Some of your posts, the box. This box is like this. Yeah, and there's a subtle not irony, a sarcasm in your post.
There is.
Because you're seeing this incredible beauty and you talk about it. You use a word, I can't remember, nature high or whatever. I looked at, you have a glossary of terms on your website, which I really liked. But some terms that you like to use. And so some of them are this celebration of the planet that you're now transversing in real time.
Yes.
But then there's a whole huge swath of it that you said we've invaded it all.
There's a layer of concrete of, you cleared the forest and then just left it to waste. You look at the dirt in some places and there's chunks of concrete and old pieces of house and an empty lot in a city. There's
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.